All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dana Echemendia, and I am the program chair at STEM for Her. We've had a lot of requests to make this session available for students who could not join. So we are recording this session, and we will make it accessible to those students who could not attend today. Thank you for joining today's second installment in the Explore Biosciences Opportunities Series, or EBO for short. I want to give a big thank you to our partner today, Bristol Myers Squibb. You had the chance to hear from them during the kickoff meeting on December 12th, and we are excited to learn more about BMS today. Let me introduce today's speaker. We have the pleasure to hear from Chetna Rao, Head of Global Research and Early Development STEM Strategy at BMS. Dr. Rao plays a central role in building a diverse and inclusive culture to build a talent pipeline for the next generation of innovative scientists. As a global R&ED head, she oversees STEM initiatives across the R&ED landscape. We will hear about her background and experience directly from her, and she will give us a step-by-step guide in drug discovery and development. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session, so I encourage you to write questions on the chat, and we'll take time to address them later. We're excited to continue this deep dive into biopharma, so I'll hand over the presentation to Dr. Rao.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I always get very excited when I have to speak to students. It kind of takes me back to my school days, and of course, things have changed quite a bit since then, but it's a great format for me to interact with you guys, and it's good to know that the recording is available so that you can see, what are the options that you have in terms of either a biotech or a biopharma industry. And if you get into science, there's a lot of things you can do in our industry. So I want to give you a little bit of flair for that, and also how we develop drugs, from the bedside to the bedside. A little bit about myself before I go in there. So I was born and raised in India. So I'm Indian by birth, but American by choice. I've been in this country for over 35 years, and I call it home now. I went to school in Mumbai in India. I studied in an Irish convent from kindergarten to 12th grade. It was an all-girls school. I did my bachelor's and as well as my master's from University of Mumbai. And my major was biochemistry and botany for my bachelor's. And then for my master's, it was more biochemistry because I loved the chemistry aspect as well as the biology. And this was like a perfect combination to work with. I left India with, behind and came here to the United States to do my PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Florida. I tell everybody that I've been following the sun. From Mumbai, I came to Florida, and then from Florida, I came to California. So I like warm weather, so that's why I'm here. I did a postdoc after my PhD at University of California in Davis. I'm an enzymologist by training. I love working with proteins, and I've always stayed working with proteins all through my career. After my postdoc, I did 3 jobs in startup companies, Coulter Pharmaceuticals, Corixa Corporation, and Medrex, which were all in the Bay Area here in California. And our company Medrex was acquired by Bristol Myers Squibb in 2010, and I've been with Bristol Myers Squibb since then. My hobbies, I love traveling. I love to go meet people from different parts of the world. I love yoga. I do hiking, which has kind of gone down a little bit because I have knee issues recently. I love to cook, and I just put a picture of a Thai green curry that I made a few weeks ago. I love to garden. This was a new thing that I took on during the pandemic because we were shelter in place, so we couldn't go to work. I was working from home, and I decided to start gardening, and I simply love it now. And a picture of my first harvest from last year. I've been growing tomatoes and peppers during the summer. I currently live in the Bay Area here in Northern California with my husband and my elderly mother. And, I still work with scientists. I've sort of pivoted from doing science to doing more STEM strategy because I think it's a point in my life I really want to give back to the community and help students like you to take up science as careers. So enough about me. For topics for today, I just want to give you a very high overview of what drug discovery and development is, either in a biotech company or a biopharmaceutical company, sort of a step-by-step guide. And towards the end, I'm just going to give you a lot of biopharma and biotech career options that you can think about beyond just working in a lab. There are several out there. I've just put it up there on the slide so that you can always Google it and see what it is all about and get more details about it. And then if I'm totally open to questions and answers once the presentation is done. So drug discovery, why is drug discovery so important? For us at BMS, our main focus is patients. That's our centerpiece. We work for our patients. As you know, that throughout the world, there's a lot of diseases, there's heart disease, there's cancer, there's just getting sick, because of a bacterial infection or a viral infection. You all went through COVID, it was a virus that nobody had heard of. We went through a pandemic. So there's always need for medicines. There's always need for people to get better. So our focus is on our patients. So when we think of drug discovery and development, it's sort of the sum total of all the steps that are taken by research to identify a new chemical or a biological substance, which we can then transform into a product. What I mean by product is a medicine that is then approved by the Federal Drug Administration for use for these patients. And what it does, it really helps the patients improve their life, whether it's cancer or heart disease, by taking our medications, they feel better. So, that's our centerpiece. Now, it's not easy when we say, oh, we made this drug for patients with melanoma or for lung cancer. It takes a lot of work, right? It's a lot of capital investment and time investment. It's a very intensive and laborious process. And on an average, it takes about 10 to 15 years for a company to get a drug from the idea of the concept of the idea saying that, hey, we can use this for treating a patient to when it gets approved and the patient gets to use it. It takes 10 to 15 years. It's a long time. It takes a lot of effort from multiple scientists, different peoples within our company to get this drug to the market. And the cost of, doing that is close to about $2 billion, and these are figures from 2021. But what is exactly involved and, who does what when we're trying to get a drug, right? So I'm going to go through some steps, as to what happens when we say, hey, we want to make a drug to address a certain medical condition for patients. So there are different steps. One is target identification. What I mean by target identification is, let's say we are thinking about, a person who's getting sick because of bacterial infections, just as an example, because it's simple. We all get sick. We have taken antibiotics. But as as years have gone by, there are a lot of resistant strains of, bacteria, which cannot be treated with our standard ampicillin, amoxicillin, penicillin, the ones that you're taking. So now we have an identification. We're saying, okay, we have these bacteria, which we cannot treat with the current antibiotics that we have. What can we do? Can we make some new antibiotics which are now specific to these bacteria, which is a different strain? So the researchers then have to validate this, saying that, yes, we can work on this, and these are the things that we want to do. So there is a plan that is put in process. A lot of work goes through the research, and then from research, it goes into preclinical studies. That means we're going to test this on mice. We're going to test this on, bacteria of different strains to see whether we can kill those bacteria or not. So that's all preclinical work. Once the preclinical work says, yeah, this is going well, then it goes into clinical trials, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Once it goes into clinical trials, we have to think about how we are going to do the pharmaceutical development of this drug. And once we do that, how are we going to commercialize it so that you and I can take it from our doctor once he prescribes it? So there are multiple steps that are involved, multiple roles within each step that are involved when it comes to commercialization of a drug. So this is just like a sort of continuum of what happens. So first we have the concept, okay, this is what we want to do. And then in the research, we do the target selection, we validate the target, we do the lead finding and optimization, because you can come up with about 5,000 or even 5 million compounds that can treat an antibiotic resistant bacteria, but which is your lead compound? So there's a lot of iterations that are involved. This works good, the efficacy is good, it works really well, but there might be some problems in terms of solubility of this drug. We might not be able to compound it into a tablet. So there's a lot of things that go on, multiple steps to come up with what the lead compound would be. Once we have the lead compound, then we test it in preclinical, clinical, and then of course regulatory approval. Now, when I say we have a lead compound, it's every company doesn't have just one lead, right? We always have backup leads. And the reason we do that is because sometimes during the preclinical development or during manufacturing, there might be some issues that people run into just because of the nature of that particular molecule. Then we can always go to a backup and say, let's see whether we can work with that. So you always have to get all your ducks lined up before you think about moving a drug to the next stage. So having 2 or 3 backup compounds is always good. Now, for clinical development, this involves a lot of clinicians, patient registration, getting patients in who are suffering from this, who have some drug-resistant strains within them which are not being treated, so we can get those patients in. Or if it's for a cancer drug, if you're looking for patients who have lung cancer or breast cancer, we can actually get those patients into our clinical trials. Once the clinical trials are done, it's not end of the story, right? We have a big organization called the Federal Drug Board, which actually approves these drugs. And it's a lot of paperwork that's involved because everything we manufacture, all the batches that we manufacture, all that data goes into their section. All the clinical trials, what were the dosage that was given, who are the patients, all that stuff goes into this big document, which is thousands and thousands of papers. And then people from the FDA will actually review it. They will look, hey, is this drug really good enough? Is it efficacious enough? Did it really was good for the patients? What was the success rate? Based on that, the FDA will then approve the drug. Once the FDA approves the drug, we register the drug, and that's when the commercialization comes up. What are we going to do? How are we going to sell this? Who's going to sell it? What are the talking points for salespeople? All that thing comes into place. So this is just a little snapshot of what the different steps for drug discovery are. Now, depending on the drug, some of the steps may take longer or less time. So if it's an oral drug or versus, an antibody, which is a biological drug, some of the steps might take a little longer. The manufacturing process might be different. So, but this is just like a snapshot. So these steps are always involved in every drug approval from the time of the concept till it gets approved. But, timelines may change depending on what you're trying to do. Now, if you're in the high-tech industry, none of this happens, right? Because you're not testing it in humans or animals, or if there's a veterinarian drug, it's, it's an app that you produced, or it's, it's a microchip, which is going to be faster than the chip before. So approvals go much faster when you're in the high-tech industry. Now, this still comes under the STEM umbrella because, it's engineering and mathematics that are involved in making these chips. So those approvals look very different from what you're doing here because these are actually going into people. They're going into people's bodies. So you have to remember that depending on the field you're in, your approvals may look very, very different. So this is an example I was just giving you is, an antibiotics. I'm sure everybody in this room has taken antibiotics at some point or the other. What is an antibiotic? An antibiotic is a medicine that fights infections caused by bacteria alone, not viruses. So you have to remember that antibiotics only work on bacteria and not virus. And it's in humans and animals, it kills by killing the bacteria or making it more difficult for the bacteria to grow and multiply. So this is what antibiotics do. They're germs and they're everywhere. They are on door handles. That's why during COVID, they were telling you to wash everything because viruses and bacteria can stay on surfaces. Some don't, some can. So these are germs, and they are inside our body and outside our body. There are good bacteria inside our body. Our biome, which is in the gut, is actually very good for you. It helps us digest our food. It helps with our immune system. So there's good and bad bacteria. We make antibiotics to get rid of the bad bacteria. Unfortunately, when you take that, you also get rid of the good bacteria within your system. And that's why the doctors always tell you, try and eat a lot of yogurt when you're taking antibiotics so that you can replenish your gut bacteria again once your antibiotic dose is done. So what does a bacterial infection look like? So this is the invasion phase. So you have the body and you get infected by bacteria and it's invaded. And bacteria multiply very fast. For example, the doubling rate of a bacteria is about 24 hours. Within 24 hours, you have double the amount. And then after 24 hours, you have more double the amount. So you need to get rid of it as quickly as possible from your body. So an antibiotic is invented specifically to kill certain types of bacteria. There are different varieties of bacteria, and you have different antibiotics depending on the variety of bacteria. For example, sometimes if you get an infection in your urine, they do a culture to see what kind of bacteria is infecting you, and they'll give you a particular antibiotic to take so that you can get rid of it, and then your bacteria dies. So if it dies, everything is great, you feel better, you take your full dose, and you're good to go. But what has happened over time is we have generated resistant bacteria. And what has happened is the bacteria invades, you give your antibiotic, but the bacteria within your body has gone through some kind of mutation. And this happens all the time. It happens with viruses, it happens with bacteria. And once the virus or a bacteria mutate, then that antibiotic for that bacteria may not work anymore. So you still have these population of bacteria which are still alive within your body, but they cannot be killed by the antibiotic that was prescribed by a doctor. So this is what we call is a resistant bacteria. And recently we are seeing a lot of cases, within United States, even globally, that there's a rise of resistant bacteria within our communities. So from pathway from bedside to bedside. So, I gave you a big, sort of a screenshot of what happens at every stage. Now, if you look at the screening and discovery, so as a scientist, when you decide that, this is what I want to go with, you have to look for early research. You have to look for new biosynthetic pathways, new products. Sometimes you might go directly from a compound such as penicillin, which is already available. But now, can we change some of the bonds in the penicillin? Can we change it to look a little different? And then it becomes a different antibiotic, which can now probably work on another bacterial strain, which hadn't worked on previously with penicillin. So the screening and discovery phase is a very, very long phase because it's sort of back and forth. There's a lot of iterations. So you make this compound and then you try it, it doesn't work. Then you tweak it, you make different things, you try it again. It partially works, you want to tweak it more. So I think the screening and discovery phase is probably the longest that a drug resides from the target identification before it goes into preclinical development. And this is where a lot of the scientists are tirelessly working, trying to do things. And I can tell you about science, right? Science is always not about success. There's a lot of failures. Just to let you know that most of the drugs that go into the clinical trials, about 90% of them fail, only 10% actually succeed. So I have worked on 3 approved drugs, and I've worked on some other drugs which have not been approved because they didn't work in the clinic. But that doesn't stop me from doing science because there are patients always there and we need to make those medicines. So there's a lot of iterations involved. There's a lot of successes, there's failures. But one thing that I have learned in my career is I have learned more from my failures than my successes. Because from the failures, what you learn is this is what I should not be doing because it doesn't work. If everything succeeds all the time, you never know what is not working. So, you have to take it on both sides. You want to take the successes and the failures when you're doing research because that's just how it is. The preclinical development, once the candidates are discovered, they are evaluated first in mice, sometimes just on cells. Sometimes they might go with higher species, especially if it's going into humans. They will do it in non-human primates, because we need to know whether these drugs are safe or not. Before you can put it into humans, you have to show to the FDA that you have done some trials in vitro under laboratory conditions, with the same drug that you're going to give to the patients. They need to look at that data. We need to show whether these drugs were toxic or not, and if it was toxic, at what dosage they were toxic. Because when you make a drug at low doses, you may not see any toxicity where the patients get sick, but higher doses, you may know that there is some kind of toxicity. So you need to do sort of a dose response even in your animal studies, going from a low dose to a very high dose to see what dose is actually tolerated by the animals, and then it then translates to humans. And then you have to do the clinical trials, which is in target species. If it's a veterinarian medication, it'll be in cats or dogs. If it's for humans, and of course it'll be in human trials. Once you do that, you have to do the registration with the FDA. We have to review the data and the documents for the regulatory authority to be for the product approval. And in the meantime, while these things are going on, we are actually figuring out processes, how to manufacture this at a large scale. And why this is important is because when you're doing research, the amount of material that you use to do the studies is much lower, right? You're talking about a small mouse, or you're talking just putting it in the cells. You're needing a few milliliters of this or that. But when you go into manufacturing, you're talking about large scale. Now you have to make doses for patients across the country or across the globe sometimes. So you need to do a lot more. And there you have to remember is what you grow in a laboratory in a small flask may not translate to when you're growing something in a big vat or a big fermenter, because the kinetics are different. That's where, a lot of chemical engineers come into play, saying that, this is what you want to do. These are the kinetics of the reaction. We want to do things differently when we scale it up. So there's a lot of work that goes on into manufacturing too. As the manufacturing is going on, the marketing department then figures out, how are we going to market this drug? You have to look at your competition. Are you first in the market? Are you second in the market? So there's a lot of research that goes on with the marketing and the sales group to figure out what's the best way to market this drug, into the population. And then once it's marketed, then, it goes into either humans or a veterinary medicine, and it does have a clinical, economic, and social impact. So, starting from this discovery all the way to the clinic, as I told you, can take anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So it's a long process. Now, for making a new antibiotic for a drug-resistant bacteria, as I told you, you have researchers, you can have new chemical synthesis, you have these compounds, and then you have these libraries of different bacteria. We have different potential antibiotics. And one thing I want you to remember is, when you're doing science, you typically think about a scientist in a lab coat, wearing glasses and pipetting stuff from one tube to the other. That's a very time-intensive process. And I did that when I was in grad school, right? Things have changed a lot since. We have robots now. So if you want to screen thousands of compounds, you don't have to do this manually. You don't have to take a pipette and pipette 1,000 times. We have robots, which you can see here in, it's a little yellow. It looks like one of the things you probably saw in a Star Wars movie, but these are called liquid handlers, and they can screen close to 10,000 compounds in a few hours. So you can imagine how you can actually decrease that 10 to 15 years of timeline by using robots, and because that really speeds up the process. So this is another avenue where you can think about, hey, I can be a technician where I can know how to use the robots, program the robots, or actually work in a company that makes robots. Robotics is becoming a very popular field right now. So even if you're an engineering student or you've learned some technology courses doing robotics, you can still put that into a pharmaceutical company, because in manufacturing, these things are needed. Even in research, robotics are coming more and more into play, just because you can increase the speed of when you can use these drugs. So clinical trials is one of the most important thing for every company, which is a biotech or a pharmaceutical company. And there are different phases of clinical trials. We talked a little bit about the early discovery and ongoing preclinical research. The first thing you want to do is a phase 1 trial. And the phase 1 trial is normally done just purely for looking at safety and to look at dosage levels. So based on your data that you have from your preclinical studies, which you've done with animals, there are programs, and this is where the people who do a lot of computer work, which I don't do, there are programs which can predict. It's a prediction algorithm which can predict, like, based on the data that we've seen in animals, now we can convert that into humans. What should be the starting dose? So there is a whole department which is called pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics group, which does all this modeling. So they do a modeling of, if this drug is given to a human being, and in animals, this is how we saw the drug fall apart or degrade, because everything gets chewed down at some point in our body, and it goes out through our urine, or it goes out through feces. So all the drugs go away at some point, because each one has a time limit where it stays within your body. So based on that data, they can predict what can happen in humans. And from those predictions, you have to figure out what is the safety and the best dosage level to start your phase 1 clinical trial. And typically you have maybe 20 to 40 patients, not more than that, in a phase 1 trial, where they'll give a small dose, or maybe sometimes they will increase the dose over time, just to see it's safe or not. Once you have that safety profile saying that, okay, this drug is good to go with patients, they monitor their blood levels for minerals, and their liver, their kidneys, they measure all the functions just to make sure that it's actually safe to go. Then it goes into phase 2, where there's less than 100 participants, but now again, you're increasing your treatment to a bigger group so that you get more statistical data, okay? And then phase 3 is more than 100 participants, and these studies, phase 3 is when it can go to thousands of patients, less than 1,000, maybe from 100 to 900 patients. And that's the data that you start now submitting to the regulatory agency for approval, saying that, listen, we have done phase 3, this looks good. This was the dose where we started seeing some effects, so we're not going to go beyond that dose, which is called the maximum tolerated dose. We're not going to go more than that. We're going to stay below that. And, sometimes they'll give a single dose. They might do studies with multiple doses, 2 weeks apart or a month apart. So all that data and all those clinical trial data is being collected as it's going on, and it finally gets submitted to the regulatory agency. In our case, it's the FDA. Once the FDA approves it, we go into phase 4, which is, when they say approve, they're like, you're good to go to phase 4. It's not that they're saying, yeah, your approval, you're good to go to phase 4. They do more patients, like more than 1,000 involved. And, the treatment keeps going on and on till we get more and more data. And then the final product is given to the FDA for approval. They say, yes, we have approved the drugs. And that's when we go into marketing and sales. Of course, in the background, during the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the manufacturing is going on, because we need that drug even for our phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 trials. So the manufacturing process is ongoing while all of these are going. And we want to ensure that once the approval happens, we have enough doses to go to the market so that patients can benefit from it. So there's a lot of moving parts, different departments, different people talking to each other constantly, saying that things are going in the right direction. Now, sometimes we may see an adverse event, then FDA will ask us what happened. Then we have to monitor the patient and let them know that it was an adverse event, but the patient has gotten better. So these things happen too, but that's where we have clinicians, we have doctors who are running clinical trials, we have clinical research associates at the clinical trial sites who are looking at the patients, who are monitoring everything, writing out all the data, and sending out that information to our clinical team so that they know what's going on at each clinical trial. Now, manufacturing, I'm just showing you some pictures of, this is where an antibiotic was being manufactured. And these are all done in very sterile conditions because we don't want patients to get sick if there was a contamination in any of our manufacturing suites. So you have to be very, very careful when you're making these. So a lot of these drugs, be it just oral pills, or if it's a liquid where it's an injectable, all of this is done in manufacturing. Now, the beauty about manufacturing is there's a lot of courses in certain universities, which are certificate courses, where you can do a 2-year course to go as a manufacturing assistant or manufacturing technician. So there are some people who say, I don't want to do a 4-year course. I would like to do something like that where I'd get a job, and I will benefit from making all these drugs, which is going to give it to patients, and I'll feel good about it. So there are a lot of options that you can consider when you're thinking about your STEM careers, and when you're thinking about jobs that you want to do, whether you want to work in a biotech or a biopharma. Manufacture is one thing you can do. It's a lot of fun, and these days, there's a lot of robots, so you got to work with fun robots. And if you get an opportunity to do an internship somewhere, although once you go to college, it's easier to get an internship into a pharmaceutical company. Try and do that, because there's always advertisements from every company that they take summer interns. It's typically 8 to 10 week program. This might be an opportunity for you to learn once you get into college. Now, the last but not the least is marketing and strategy. I am by no means a marketing or a strategy person, but there's a lot of things that are involved in marketing and strategy, and you can be involved in this under the STEM umbrella, because you're still working for a drug. You're marketing a drug. You're making, the advertising, the website design, social networking. I know your generation is great about posting stuff. Social networking is important. And then there is an entity which decides what the pricing is going to be. There are a lot of live events that happen where they invite patients who've benefited from the phase 1, 2, 3 trials to talk about how they feel about it. There's a whole, department which thinks about what the packaging should look like. You'll be amazed how much work goes into just figuring out what should be the coloring of the package, how big the vial should be, how big the writing should be. There's a lot of research that goes into it, so that, when a patient picks up a Tylenol, you have that red and white thing. There was a lot of work that went into it, and trying to make that visible to, an individual who goes into a pharmacy. So marketing and strategy works very closely while the phase 2 and 3 trials are going on to say, if we get approval, then, what can we do? What are the different things we can do? And then there are promotions where they will invite doctors and say, these are the new drugs that we have on the market right now. This is what it does. They have advertising. If you guys are watching TV, you see advertising that comes from many companies. Sometimes you'll have an influencer talk about certain drugs that they have taken from a company and how it has benefited them. For example, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is now talking about Eliquis, which is a heart medication from BMS, and how it's benefiting him. So, all these things play an important role in how a drug goes to the market and to the public, and marketing and strategy work a lot on that. Now, this is a lot of information here, and I'm not going to talk about it. There's so many roles that you can take in a biopharma or a biotech company. If you want to be in research and development, you can be an immunologist, a biochemist, a biostatistician, cytotechnologies, where you can take, where people take little screens of tissues to look at under the microscope to see what a cancer cell looks like, or cancer tissue looks like, what a normal tissue looks like. And then, there's public health. You can be a forensic technician, and manufacturing. I talked about that a little bit. Now, there is something called health informatics, right? So, because it's healthcare, there are hospitals involved, there are clinical trials involved. Of course, the pharmaceutical companies are involved, but you can be a nurse manager. You can transcribe, notes from doctors. You can work in a Medicare or Medicaid facility. You can be a healthcare administrator, a nurse consultant, a hospital administrator. You can be involved in managed care. You can be a patent agent and a patent lawyer, because when we make drugs, we of course file patents for those. So you can be working as a patent agent. If you don't want to go to law school, then you can be an assistant to a patent lawyer. You can be a social worker to help patients get access to these drugs too. There's a lot of patient access organizations which advocate for patients. You can work with them. So these are some of the roles. And then, of course, if you want direct patient care, then you can be a nurse, you can be a doctor, a physical therapist, you can be a counselor, you can be a massage therapist, because a lot of patients who go through anti-cancer drugs go through a lot of pain. So helping them with massaging, there are massage technicians. You can be a dentist, a chiropractor. I mean, there's so many things you can do. I don't want people to think that to be in science, you have to go get a bachelor's, a master's, and PhD, and just do an MD, and only then you can be a science. No, there is a lot of opportunities where you can still do the science. You can still do the science and be involved with patients, be involved with doctors, and be involved in robotics by taking some kind of engineering degree if you want to. And then, of course, there's imaging and diagnostics. I'm sure some of you have gone and gotten x-rays done. There's a lot of imaging companies that have come up. You could be a dental laboratory technician, a pathologist technician, an MRI technologist. So, those require certain, I think, courses that you can take, which specialize you in those. You can be any one of these if you want to. So, I've just put it out there. I know these slides will be available to you. You can always Google it and see what it is. If it interests you, it'll tell you a little bit about what is involved in being MRI technologist. What are the degrees that you need to take? What coursework do you need to take? It kind of helps you understand what you want to do in the future. So with that, I think I'll end my talk, and I'm open to any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Thank you so much. We have some folks in the room live. If there's any questions, you can raise your hands, the little note there. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions myself. So sure. I thought I would just throw this out there. First, you talked about how the drug discovery process can take 10 to 15 years. I mean, it's a long process. Mm-hmm. I imagine there's milestones, of course, but how can you talk a little bit about the teams that are working for those milestones? How big are those teams in your experience? And I realize there may be...
It's a lot. So, if you look at, I'm talking from a BMS perspective, right? So I work in the Bay Area, and of course we have different sites. We have in Washington, San Diego, New Jersey, Cambridge. Each site has I would say about 200 to 300 scientists. Lawrenceville has a lot more. They're close to thousands. So when you're talking about, let's say in my particular area, we have about 300 scientists, right, working together. And that's just research. So we are working in that early space. Now, we don't just work on one project, right? We have multiple projects. So within research, we have touch points, and we call them, go-to points, go to 1, go to 2, go to 3, go to 4. So when you're doing a target identification, for example, let's say I read a paper on something and I was like, oh, this looks like an interesting target. So I would do a lot more research on my own beyond doing my job, and then come up with a plan and say, hey, listen, I read this article and I think we have a great opportunity, say, for a particular cancer, let's say breast cancer, for example. And there is some data that's involved. There's a couple of companies already working on it, but they're in early stage. We are in early stage too. Can we think about it? So there is a committee that I would present to and say, this is an idea. And these committees normally, high level leadership, they look at it and they say, oh my God, Chetna, this is a great idea. Let's go forward with that. Then I get a small group of people, in the early phase, who are also working on other projects. So we have to start doing prioritization, right? So if some project has a higher need for patients, and maybe the competition is moving faster than us, yes, then we need to go with that. If the competition is on par, then we can figure out. So we have to prioritize almost on a quarterly basis, saying that, okay, we need more help on this project. We're going to move some people from this project to the other, which sometimes upsets people. They're like, oh my God, why are they moving away? But they come back again. So, we have a matrix environment that we work in. So people are always helping each other out because it's based on your skills. You have skills. For example, I'm a biochemist. I have skills to give in biochemistry, and maybe there are 4 projects that need that. So I have to spend my time working on those 4 projects. So prioritization becomes extremely important, and time management becomes very important.
Excellent. That's very interesting. Well, so how important is it to, even as a biochemist, to perform different roles within the team to get a good understanding of the full process? I imagine that also helps as you move up in the organization.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I started as a bench scientist, right? I did a postdoc and I started as a bench scientist where I was just doing my, I had my shields on, I was just doing my own experiment. And then you start talking to, one thing I would always tell people is to connect. Go out and speak to people, talk to them, talk to your colleagues, talk to your manager or your manager's manager. The more you network with people, the more you understand the process, the more you build your skills too. For me, networking is one of the most important things in career building. You can be a brilliant scientist, but if you're working at the lab bench all day, nobody notices you, right? And scientists by nature are introverts. Most of them. I'm not, but most people are introverts. And for an introvert to go out there and speak with people becomes even more harder, right? So one of the things which I tell specifically for women is, if you know one of your colleagues has a brilliant idea, speak it out in public and say, hey, Anna has this great idea. I think you guys should listen to it. Give them the stage, because they on their own may not come up and speak about it. So we as women have to help each other out so that they get the stage to talk about, what they know, and that idea might come forward, and then Anna feels good about it, right? And that's how you get people out of the shell. So networking is important. Understanding, like I walk to a cell biologist and say, hey, tell me what you're doing, so that I know when I make my protein and give it to her, what's going on in there. So reach out to people, talk to people, try to understand the whole process. And there's a lot of courses that you can take on drug development, which will tell you, but it's more like, it's not hands-on. But talking to people, honestly, you learn a lot more.
Yeah, so true. Well, so if a student has selected something broader, something like biochemistry in college, what is the role of those internships in the, throughout those 4 years? Okay. What should they be thinking about to find their right? Because you may not know exactly what you want to do until the very end.
No, that's a great question. I'll just tell you guys, when I was growing up, of course, this was maybe when I was 10 or 12 years old, I wanted to be a flight attendant because I wanted to travel the world. I'm like, this is the best job ever. I can travel the world. And then I realized, well, I can travel the world without being a flight attendant, right? So I went into science. And, you may not have a role model within your network, but there are always role models out there. Look at them. I mean, if you look at all the women scientists who recently got the Nobel Prize, for click chemistry and stuff like that, these are all women. It's amazing. It's phenomenal. So as a biochemist, think about getting into an internship program where they do protein work. But that shouldn't stop you. You can still do cell work and say, I'm a biochemist, but I want to learn more about cell biology. And, if there's an internship, reach out. BMS always has internships. If there are people, BMS takes interns who are in college, though, not in high school. So in college, if there are internships, if BMS is hiring, look into that. And typically these come out in November, December timeframe on their careers webpage. And we send it out on LinkedIn too. I don't know how many of you guys are on LinkedIn. That's the only social media I'm on. But that's a good place to go and say if there are summer internships available. And I'll tell you, we get a lot of students applying from the East Coast to the West Coast, and we get them here. You get a stipend to come and stay here. You can do your research. You can do whatever you want. So I think looking for those internships, not just in industry, but even in academia. If you're in college, walk up to a professor and say, hey, can I come and work here for the summer? And you can do some experiments. You may work alongside a graduate student and learn from them. That's how you get the curiosity. And maybe after like one summer, you're like, this is not for me. And that's okay. But at least you've tried it, right? I think that's the important part, is to try, see what sticks to you, what you really like. You want to go shadow somebody, just don't be afraid to email and ask people. The worst they can do is say, no, I don't have the time. But if you never ask, you'll never know that you have that opportunity. So be brave to just reach out and say, I'm a freshman, I'm a sophomore at so-and-so university. I liked your research. I was wondering if I could come and work for the summer. Within your university, you can do that. Outside your university, you can do that. Don't be afraid. You have always to ask. Take that step, take that bold step.
So important. That's great advice. Okay, I'll have one last question, unless anybody else has. I could keep on talking to you, but I wanted to ask about also just words of advice for what skills did you learn at school that are most important for your everyday job, and what are those skills that you learned on the job that you may not have learned in school that are more critical to your
So one of the biggest skills, which I don't learn in school, because I was in school and I was doing a lot of things, is time management. It is so important to do time management, because with the fast-paced world that we are in right now, things fall very quickly. And if when you're in a company such as mine or any others, timelines are very important. That 10 to 15 years timeline, right? You miss out 1 week, you're pushed back quite a bit. So time is of the essence. And our patients need those drugs sooner the better, right? Now with robotics and stuff, things have shortened the timeline a little bit. But at the same time, if you have, so typically when I come to work, on a Monday morning, I know my calendar. This is what I'm going to do Monday through Friday. I've set it up. I know people say I'm type A personality, I'm too organized, but honestly, it helps you a lot. Organization is a great skill to have, and time management is a great skill to have. And one more advice that I give to you is, no matter what you do it with passion. Because when you do it with passion, you get noticed and you become successful. Don't do anything half-heartedly, because it'll show. It'll show in your final product. Put the passion in there, show that grit that you have, and do it, and you will get noticed. The other thing is speak up. Always speak up. Don't be shy to speak up. People are always listening. So if you have questions, speak up. And no question is a stupid question. I always tell people, if you never ask a question, you'll never get the answer. Always ask. You can hear no, but that's okay. But then you've said yourself, I did my job, I've asked, the answer was no. So ask. Time management is important, and passion. Whatever you do it with a lot of passion.
Well, that's a great note to end on. That was terrific. Great. Thank you so much for
thank you.
the
There's, I think, does anybody have a question? No.
Yeah. Do we have anybody in the room?
Don't be shy, girls.
I know. And you can send me, I know that you probably have my email address. You please go ahead and send me any questions. I can always target
Jaya has a question
back to you.
Yeah. So I'm always curious, because in the pharma industry, a lot of the time, because of the money involved and the time investment, there's a lot of high stakes. So how do you deal with setbacks when you're doing experiments or drug discovery? Like how, and what advice would you give someone who's, say, newly entering the field about how to deal with those setbacks?
Okay. it's a very, very, very good question. As I told you, there are successes and failures, right? I've been on several failures, I can tell you that, and I've been on successes too. So, it comes down to the funding that you have for your research, because every company has funding, right? This is how much it's going to go into research, this is how much is going to go into development, and this is how much is going into marketing and commercial. Sometimes you take hits. You take a lot of hits because it didn't work in phase 1 clinical trial. And you have to remember, when you're doing phase 1, the manufacturer is already in flight, right? So they're already manufacturing the drugs, but now it didn't work. So you're coming back to it. It's very disheartening. Don't get me wrong. I was saddened when one of my drugs didn't make it in the clinic. But that doesn't stop you. What you have to remember is the end goal. The end goal is the patient, right? People used to die of the flu. People used to die of infections back before. People used to die of polio, but we got cures eventually. And if you don't have that perseverance and if you don't have that grit, those setbacks will just keep you behind. So you have to say, okay, this was a setback. We're going to put this behind. We're going to put all our energy into something new, which will work. And it has worked. Don't get me wrong. Things don't work sometimes. So those setbacks do come. They're disheartening, but you have to stand up. So one of the things we use is fail fast and fail forward. If you fail, you want to fail fast, but you still have to fail forward. We have to move forward. So you have to move forward with what you're doing, even if you fail. You have to move forward with things that are going to work. And the way I think about it is, if something has failed, now you have that cohort of scientists who can work on another project, which will be more successful, right? So you just move your resources to another project. And that has happened many times. I've worked on multiple projects, and out of the 6, maybe 2 drop off and the 4 go on. I feel bad the 2 dropped off, but then now I have all my energy now for those 4 projects that I'm going to move forward with. So you always have to have that positive hat up on your head, saying that it's okay, it's failed, but as with failures, this is what we learned. We can't do this again. And if you run into that problem again for another project, you know exactly what not to do. So, the stakes are high, yes, but we are humans. There are things that are going to work and there are things that are not going to work. So we just have to take it in the stride.
Thank you. And I also want to say thank you for a fantastic overview of the whole process. That was very enjoyable. Thank you.
My pleasure. And, please reach out if you have more questions. I'm pretty good about responding to emails, maybe not on the same day, but I do respond to emails. Trust me. You can always reach out to me if you need to know more or ask me more questions.
Thank you so much.
You have a very quiet set of girls, but I'm going to let them be quiet. Maybe they're just shy.
And thank you so much. I'm so excited we made it we're still under the time, so this is perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. And I wish all of you really good luck in your careers, no matter where you go, what you do. Do it with passion. And always, once you become successful, give back, be a mentor for somebody and help people to be where they are. Mentoring is very, very important. If you have a mentor who looks like you, talks like you, it's even better. So once you get to your careers and become successful, please give back. Reach out to those girls where, they're in your place where you're now, and be a mentor to them and talk to them about your career choices and where you've landed up. And I wish you all the very, very best. I know you guys are all going to do great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
you. And Bristol Myers Squibb for your time, your support. It has been just a terrific conversation. I'm very excited about this talk and all the feedback and advice you've been able to provide. Really
Thank you
invaluable.
so much. My pleasure. And you guys are doing great work, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yes, I hope it ignites the audience's passion and interest in pursuing a career in biopharma.
So. All right. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for your time. Please remember that there are 2 more sessions in the EBO series. Our next virtual session is with our other partner, Mertz Aesthetics, and that will be on April 11th at 4 p.m. I'll send information. The final event will be an in-person event that is with AstraZeneca here in Gaithersburg. It's their head campus, so it'll be exciting. And thank you to our partners. Actually, we will provide transportation to that event. We will send more details via email as well. So,
Okay, bye. Have a great day. Bye.
thank you. Thank you so much. We'll make the presentation available. Have a great
All
afternoon.
right, take care.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.